Hello, I'm Greg with Primal Rights. Today we're going to finish up the video series that we've been doing on the ballistic range-finding binoculars. This final part in the series is going to focus on the ballistic display, so the actual firing solution that's given by each of these units and what that looks like in the display, as well as how long it takes for the display to boot up and allow us to get a range. So each unit, we're going to start off with looking through it, and then I'm going to hit the button and activate the unit and then get a range as soon as the unit will allow me. I'm going to show you guys what that looks like through each of these units. Just like in the previous parts of this series, the image that you guys are seeing here displayed is significantly worse than what I'm experiencing when I'm looking through it with my eyes. The camera equipment will struggle greatly with the frame rates that these lasers are displaying, and it will also not look nearly as good because the camera is trying to adjust to whatever lens prescription is in each of these units. And so don't draw conclusions where none are to be drawn. What we're focusing on here is how long does it take the unit to boot up and allow us to get a range, and then how long before it actually spits out a firing solution that we could foreseeably dial into the rifle and start to execute a shot. I'd once again like to thank Euro-Optic for their help in the creation of this video by loaning us the binocular units that we didn't have. And a little birdie landed on my shoulder and told me that if you happen to call Euro-Optic and talk to Kiefer and you mention Primal Rights is where you had heard their name, or that's what caused you to call, you might be able to ask Kiefer for the very best price there on the phone. Many of the prices you see on their website aren't, in fact, their best possible price. So for those of you price-conscious shoppers out there, I'd encourage you to give Kiefer a call directly and let him know that you heard about them on Primal Rights and see if they can give you a hand. That's also true for units that you didn't see me mention here in this video. There are quite a lot of lower-cost range-finding binoculars out there that are very popular and quite good. And I'll be talking to Kiefer about potentially showing you guys some of those units. Maybe we'll just grab what I think is the best one in the budget price range and see if we can get one of those to take a look at. Now, first I'd like to touch on the software with each of these units. They all have a phone app. So you take your smartphone, you go to the App Store, you download the respective company's app, and then within the app, you have the ability to create your ballistic profile. This is where we plug in our bullet information, the rifle information, and how we interface with the actual bino. So we would pair the binocular to the phone, and that's how we transfer the profiles that we create in the software into each of these devices. Some of the apps are a little more intuitive than others, but none of them presented what I felt to be a problem in terms of your ability to kind of start using it and get along with it. Those that had the applied ballistics bullet library availability, obviously that's a massive benefit because then you can just go in there and select your bullet, and it has all of the custom curves, G1 and G7 drag profiles available when you select the bullet out of the library. Those units that don't have accessibility with the bullet library, you have to program that in manually. And of course, when you're putting it in there manually, you don't get a bullet-specific custom curve. As many of you know, the custom curves are a much better representation of how that bullet is reacting in the atmosphere in varying conditions at various distances than the single number representation we get by the G1 and G7 standard projectile model. The custom curve, in my experience, has been more reliable in getting first-round hits on small targets at distant ranges in the field. We'll start talking about the model-to-model differences now. The Sig Kilo 6K, this unit doesn't actually have the ability to put a wind reading in from the bino itself. So there's no buttons on this thing that will allow us to input a wind, either vector or velocity. So I can't change the wind direction or the wind intensity with any buttons on this unit. In order to do that, I have to hook it up to the phone. So if I'm out actually using this thing, and let's say that I'm taking shot over here, and now I want to switch and go over here, well, along with that, I'm going to have to change the wind in my direction of fire. There is no way to do that using buttons on the unit. You have to link it to the phone in real time, have it linked to the phone, and then do it in the software, in the app. So the Sig Kilo 6K immediately goes to the bottom of the pack for that reason. There's no way for you to just separate yourself from the phone once you've loaded your Ballistic app in there and just operate in the field using only this. You have to bring the phone with you no matter where you are or where you go if you want to have real-time ability to change the wind. The Vortex is the only one of the bunch that has a wind button on it. So in this instance, we actually point it in the direction that the wind is coming from and take a wind azimuth reading. And it already is taking an azimuth reading of the target when you're doing the ranging function. And then there's arrows here that allow us to change the wind intensity. So to get the wind direction, we're using the wind button, the wind capture button, and then we're changing the intensity with these buttons here. The Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2 works similarly in the sense that we have a wind button. Now this doesn't automatically capture the azimuth when we do it like that, but we press the wind button and then we can plus or minus and change the direction that the wind is coming from in relation to our target. Then once we're done making that, we just hit the range button then, and it's going to give us our range and compute whatever we have programmed in. With the Revic here, it's kind of different in the sense that you poke the button and that allows you to change the wind direction. And so there's basically an up arrow and a down arrow here, and you change the wind direction. Then you hit the menu button and that changes to wind intensity, and you use the up and down arrows to change the intensity. And then you go ahead and fire the laser to take your range, and it'll compute using the programmed entries. The Vectronix Vector X's are the only one that has what I would call kind of your up, down, left, right keypad with a center button. The way this one works is you hold that center button down, and then you go into the menu system, and then you just navigate with the up, down, left, right arrows to go in and change the wind direction and wind speed. And you can change the wind speed 1 and wind speed 2, obviously being driven by the applied ballistics connection here. So the wind speed 1 and wind speed 2 works just like you would have in your Kestrels. Those of you that have a 5700 Elite or a 5700X or something are familiar with the wind speed 1 and wind speed 2 already. You change the angle, you change the speed, and then when you fire the laser, it computes using your entered values. That, of course, works the same way whether you have the range extenders on or off. The Swarovski EL Range joins the Sig Kilo 6K at the bottom of the pack here because it has no way to actually put a wind call into this unit. So there isn't actually any wind buttons on the unit, nor is there any wind capability that I saw built into the software on the phone. So it is literally not computing for wind or aerodynamic jump, any other effects that can be caused by the wind. So they really leave you to your own devices, and I mean that literally. If you're trying to make a shot in the field and have it count with the Swarovski, and you plan on using only the binoculars, you're going to be very badly disappointed because it is only showing you your elevation. Now, those of you that followed this channel for any amount of time, you know that that is a bold-faced lie, and we can't just do this with elevation only. If the software is not computing for wind, then that means it's also not computing for aerodynamic jump. If the ballistic solver is not computing for wind, and based on what I've seen, it doesn't seem like the ballistic solver in the Swarovski is working with wind in any capacity, that means that it's also not computing for aerodynamic jump. Those of you that have followed this channel and watched my previous content know how important aerodynamic jump can be in making a shot anywhere past 300 or 400 yards. So if you've got a big game animal and it's 800 yards away and you do not compute for aerodynamic jump in your shot and you're dealing with a pretty strong wind, folks, that can be disastrous to your hit percentage. So the Swarovski joins the Sig down at the bottom of the pile, and I would actually rate the Swarovski the worst in this test because despite the fact that we have to link to the phone on the Sig Kilo 6K, at least the computation that we're getting out of that solver is good looking. The unit's rangefinder and its beam divergence and the orientation of the laser, meaning is it lined up, that's not very good in the Sig Kilo 6K. But from a ballistic solver standpoint, you get kind of a stripped down version of applied ballistics, and it spits out a workable firing solution that I could go and use in the field and be fairly confident, so long as I got to know the quirks of the rest of the unit. But the Swarovski is completely off the table. It will not allow for proper, precise ballistic firing solutions in the field. So in order to make the Swarovski fieldable, in my opinion, you must pair it with some actual ballistic solver and just use the range that you get out of here and ignore the ballistic capability of it altogether. So at the end of the day, this is basically just a range-finding binocular. I don't feel like it can be used effectively as a ballistic range-finding binocular. The Leica Geovid Pro ABs have a single button affair, so we press the range button to turn the unit on, and then we have this other button right off to the side of the range button. You press that once, and it brings up the wind speed. So you'd press it once, and then you'd cycle this main button, your ranging button, to count up the wind. And I didn't figure out how to reverse it, so you basically got to count through the wind miles an hour all the way up to, I think, 40 miles an hour, and then it resets back to 0. And so you press the secondary button again to change wind direction, and it cycles all the way through your positions of the clock to get your wind direction. And then once you're done, you press the range button again on your target, and you get your range with the computed wind variables. So with the exception of a couple of units that I mentioned, all of these have the ability to change the wind vector and velocity on the unit using the buttons. Now, I find this to be very important for a ballistic range-finding binocular to have. We don't want to be tied to another device to change the variables of our wind or anything else to do with our shot, because one of the incredible values of having a ballistic range-finding binocular is that if one of our other sources of ballistic computation is no longer viable, so let's say we have a Kestrel and we lose it or it breaks, and now we can just transition over to the binocular and at least operate. Our hunt is not ruined, so to speak. We can use the binoculars as a standalone device to make good ballistically correct shots in the field. Now, many of my clients that go on big dollar hunts, this is a recommendation that I make all the time. We should have 4 very accessible different ways to come up with a firing solution. The most reliable and trustworthy method that I've come across is the Kestrel 5700X. That's what I use for my primary ballistic solver because it has the sensor pack and everything built right into it. I can take azimuth readings of both the direction of fire and the direction of the wind. I can take wind speed readings. Obviously, it's calculating already. It's got sensors on it for temperature and humidity, and if I want to, elevation and things like that. It's an extraordinarily versatile little unit and very reliable. So I haven't actually had one of those things fail on me to date, but there's always the possibility that it could. Well, the ballistic laser range-finding binocular then would be fallback plan number 1. We would have a trued profile both on our Kestrel and the binocular, that we could count on both of them to give us the same firing solutions. That way, if something happens to the Kestrel, we shift over and rely on the binoculars. Number 3 is our phone, our smartphone. Most of us are going to have our smartphones around, even when we're hunting. Even if we don't have any cell reception or any other connectivity, the app itself will still work, and we can still try to get whatever variables the phone itself will collect, and we'll use our own judgment to collect the others. The 4th method then is physical cards, either cards or scope cap inserts. A lot of you have seen me run those from time to time. Folks, this is like your absolute emergency level fallback, because the cards are not going to include a lot of the stuff that the computation engines in these solvers will account for in real time. So we're going to have to use a lot of experience in order to drive those cards properly, or that hard data properly, to get the maximum effectiveness out of our shots. Suffice it to say, folks, if you're falling back on your hard cards, well, you've had some very unfortunate things happen on your hunt already, and I pray that you've got the presence of mind to still have a good attitude and just use those cards in the ranges that they're actually going to allow you to have 100% effective shots. Now let's take a look through some of these units so I can show you what each of the displays look like. The Sig Kilo 6K shows you the distance to the target and the angle on screen number 1. Then it flashes and shows the elevation, and then it flashes again and shows you the windage. Now this is an effect we'll see repeated for several of these units, and it does kind of turn into a time killer, and you're very intently focusing on the display and not your target animal, because it just flashes for a second and then disappears, and then another piece of information shows up and then disappears, and then the cycle starts all over again. So oftentimes, if the target animal does something or moves in a certain way that catches your eye, you'll miss the information in the cycle. Maybe you'll miss the windage, or maybe you'll miss the elevation depending on when you happen to glance away. Then you have to watch the cycle repeat itself again in order to get your elevation and your windage. So in a time crunch, this strategy can be a real problem. The Vortex also flashes the range and the angle, but then the next screen, it flashes both the elevation and windage at the same time. So you've only got 2 separate displays to cycle through here, and that's immediately going to be faster. The Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2 is showing all of the information at once. Now this is of course the best case scenario. We don't want to have to wait to get the information that we're after. So once you learn where the elevation and windage is displayed on there, you can just look immediately there, ping your target, look at there, you've got your elevation and wind call nearly simultaneously, get that dialed in and engage. That's the best implementation we've seen so far in terms of the time savings, not having to flash the information and have it then disappear and change to something else. Everything that we need to engage the target is shown on the display as soon as we ping the target. And it's a very fast little engine inside this thing too. It spits out the solution quite quickly. The Revic, we take a step back a little bit here because now we've got the range being displayed kind of perpetually, but then the windage and elevation are flip-flopping back and forth in that top display. And it's using these little directional kind of cryptographs over on the left to say, okay, up this much and left that much or whatever direction. And so it's kind of disorienting compared to the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2. I much prefer everything to be fully displayed and right there in front of my eyes and not have more movement and things flashing that I need to try to pay attention to rather than keeping my focus on my target animal. Now, did any of you catch how the little cryptoglyph on the left side, when the wind flashed up, it said both left and right? So the wind call was correct based on the inputs that I put in there at 1.4 mils. It was pretty much what I would expect with the condition that I had programmed in. But how can in the adjustment be both left and right at the same time? Only one of those glyphs is supposed to be pointing. Now, this is a bug that I saw in the unit as I was using it several times. I would put in a wind direction very specifically, and as you can see, with 1.4 mils of hold, it's obviously saying, yep, we've got a pretty strong wind in here, and it's not a straight-on wind, so it can't be both left and right, but the binos were displaying a left and right hold. It wasn't telling me, well, hold left this much or right this much. It was just saying, hold left and right. So I think there's a issue with these, either that or there's some goofy setting in here that I haven't found yet. Either way, I didn't like the interface here. I didn't like the way that this thing was behaving when it came to the wind call. It didn't lead me to have a high level of confidence in the solution that I was getting out of the unit. The Vectronix Vector X has the most superior display of these units. Obviously, we have the crosshair right there. The aiming point is there. We don't need to worry about it. That means we can get it directed on our target animal before we even turn the unit on. And what I generally like to do is I'll pull them out of my Bino pouch and I'll hit the button on them when I'm yanking them out. Then by the time I get them trained on the target animal, it's ready for me to get a range. I don't need to wait for any reticle to show up in my view or anything like that. Now that's a little tip that you can use with any of these units. Some of them will respond to it quite well because they take a certain amount of time to boot up. So if you're going to grab the rangefinder, it's always good when you're grabbing it to try to hit the button to activate it and get it booted up and turned on, so that when you finally get it up to your eyes and trained on your target animal, the unit is ready to take a range. You can see here the display on the Vector X is the largest, easiest to read, and I get all of the information that I need to have to actually make this shot. And it's prominent. I don't have to search for it. It has great brightness and control. It's not too small. It's not too big. It is just right in terms of its display characteristics here. Now again, the Swarovski, you guys can't even really see that well because the display laser frequency is completely out of whack with what the camera sees. Now, I can see it plainly and easily, and it's not strobing like that with my eyes, but the camera doesn't capture this well. So the Swarovski just throws an elevation out there, and the elevation is wrong. I put the same ballistic profile in all of these units. So I loaded the same information best that I could in every one of these units. If I were to take a shot using the solution that the Swarovski gave me, it would almost certainly be a miss at 700 yards. So again, can't trust the Swarovski as far as I could throw it to hit a target animal. And I don't even use the Swarovski's ballistic capabilities at all. It's just a raw rangefinder. The ballistic side of it might as well not even be there. And I know they don't really advertise it as a ballistic binocular in that capacity. They call it tracking assist. So you're supposed to be able to aim this thing at an animal, ping its location on your map so that you can have an easier time finding it. And no doubt that's pretty cool, but in this situation, it doesn't help us at all. We're trying to actually hit our target animal here, and it is worthless in this capacity, in my opinion. With the Leica, we're back to the strobing, one piece of information on the screen at one time, and then it strobes something else, and then something else. Firing solution that it's giving is good enough to make a hit. We sure do have to wait a while and pay awful close attention to get those numbers out of the unit. So not very good here. The next thing you'll notice is that it flashes the information one time. That's it. So if you missed it, you have to hit the range button again in order to have it come up. Now, I don't know if there's a setting that I missed that will make this behavior go away. But this is unacceptable. If you're going to flash the information like this, it needs to be presented in loop because you might not always catch it that first time around. As you may have guessed, the winners here by a large margin for the implementation of all of this is the Vector X. It just has the best ballistic implementation of the units that I've tested here, in my opinion. Just behind that is the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2. The reason the Sig takes the second place, obviously, is it's got a very small, kind of cluttered up textual display. There's a lot of stuff displayed there, and the letters are smaller, and I find that in varying degrees of brightness, I have different levels of success in fielding the Sig Kilo 10K Gen 2, whereas the Vector X, I can use it in all practical, certainly all legal shooting light situations, and I can see that display. I can see it give me a real-time elevation and wind call that is practically usable. When I say practically, I mean it's very functionally usable. So the leader here amongst all of these in terms of its ability to give me a firing solution that I believe I can trust at the farthest ranges on the most finite targets would be the Vector X. And it gives me that information very quickly and shows it all on the screen at the same time. Now, this wouldn't always have been my recommendation because the firmware that the Vector X shipped with had a different workflow in it, meaning that when I pressed the button, it would take me to a different screen right off the bat. And I'm having to recall this from memory because I updated the firmware on all of these units to their latest firmware at the time that I did this testing. So when I hooked each of the smartphone apps up to each of these laser range-finding ballistic binoculars, the app cued me and said, hey, we've got an update available on the firmware for this thing. Would you like to update? And I went ahead and did the firmware update on all of these units before I started this entire battery of testing. So they all have the latest firmware as of just a couple of weeks ago. The workflow in the original firmware that I recall was significantly worse. In order to change the wind, I had to go like 5 or 6 or 7 clicks into that little graphical interface that they've got in order to get to the screen that I needed to change my wind. When I first got the units, I remember that being a significant complaint of mine, and I don't know if it was specific to the brand new early ones or what. Now when you hold the button, you immediately get dropped into the wind menu there, and you can change the wind vector and velocity with just a few clicks. It's quite intuitive and pretty easy to get around in. That brings us to the close of this final part in the series on these laser range-finding ballistic binoculars. I still am firmly of the belief that someone needs to fill in the gap here. Swarovski would need to team up with like Applied Ballistics or somebody to get a proper interface and a proper solver, and then they'd need to go to a different laser, obviously, to display more information. They're way behind the curve here. Sig has already got the answer to the problems with the 6K solved in the 10K, so you just throw money at that problem and you get a much better unit. But they're not very nice to look through. The Revic kind of misses the mark because it's a little bit clunky. The app and the way that you use the device itself, I'm not a huge fan of. The app, I think, is probably near the back of the pack in terms of its functionality. The Revic and the Swaro app are pretty clunky, not very nice to use in my opinion. The Leica Geovid app is all right, but I find it to be kind of lackluster. It's lacking in features and lacking in general usability and kind of niceness. Frankly, folks, the software element of this is so easily changed, and there's so many different workarounds to it that it's really not a sticking point for me, because the companies can and often do roll out changes to their software and firmware to address these various issues over time. So if you're an early adopter, you might take a minute to get some of that worked out, but over time, the community kind of puts enough pressure on these companies to change things and make them work. In my opinion, the best positioned company to give us the final solution to all of this would be Vectronix, because they have demonstrated throughout history that their ability to create a very precise rangefinder is probably unrivaled. They can make devices that give absolute range in all kinds of different situations. So they've got the technology. I know that they can make a extremely optically superior binocular as well. So the complaint that I have about the focus ring, well, they have Bino units that are range-finding Bino units, like my Vector 23, for instance. It doesn't have a focus knob. It's just an autofocus. There is no focus knob on it. It has ocular focuses, but it doesn't have what you would refer to as like adjustable focus or parallax adjustment or something like that. And optically, the Vector 23s are just as nice as the Swarovskis are to look through. So I know that they can do that. They have demonstrated with the Vector X that they have the ability to design a very complex and intricate design interface in the actual menu structure and make that all work, and the software package to display that stuff. The phone app that we use to put all of the profiles into the unit is also very intuitive, very similar to what we see with the Kestrel Link app, and due to the Applied Ballistics integration, no doubt. So they have everything they need as a company, either through the form of partnerships or directly vertically integrated assets to create what would be the final solution here. Because what we're really looking for is a Vector X that has superior optical performance to bring it up on par with the Swarovski, the focus issue resolved, and then the ability to range small targets at much more distant ranges. So we need to shrink the beam divergence down to get it like 0.5 mil by 0.5 mil or somewhere in that ballpark. And then we need to have a laser that's going to give us the power to actually make use of that smaller beam divergence and range a deer or a pronghorn, your average sized big game animal, with 100% confidence out to ranges of like 1,500 or a mile or something like that. that would allow us to use that unit, whatever they would call it, in nearly any long-range precision rifle discipline or target engagement that I could think to throw at it currently. Lastly, they need to fix their warranty. That whole issue with having the electronics only have a 3-year warranty is completely unacceptable in the modern world. Realistically, it should be a lifetime warranty, a forever warranty. Fully transferable, no registration required. Basically, your ownership and possession of the device grants you the ability to get this thing fixed whenever is necessary. And if they're not willing to do that and forever, then it needs to be some substantial amount of time, like 20 or 30 years or something like that. So if they could address these issues in another model, they could charge $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for that model, and people like myself would buy it. I would say that if they would fix the warranty issue by itself, if they would just give customers more confidence to know that they are legally standing behind these things for a longer period of time, then most of you would be very happy with the Vector X in its current implementation. I know many of you are looking for the same things that I'm looking for, and that's why you're here watching this channel. You want to be able to range much smaller targets at longer ranges, and you want to have a really good glass where you can sit and observe for hours and hours, let's full days, sun up to sundown, and do that for the entirety of hunting season if you want. The ability to get an accurate range on targets that are within your operational zone. Some of us can really shoot, folks, and we need something that's going to give us the real range and not be missing as a result of an error in our ballistic firing solutions that was generated from the onset by an incorrect range. And so we need to have these units range a little further. We need to have them look a little bit better. Do away with the focus knob altogether. We don't need it. We're not bird watchers looking at some fancy bird in the tree 10 feet away from our eyes. We need these things for hunting. Keep the same package that you've got. Keep the same interface that you've got. Keep making small tweaks and improvements as time goes on. But I think Vectronix is probably the best positioned to take advantage of it. They're the closest right now. They just need to make some strides forward as a company, standing behind their products, and then realize that there's some of us out here that do want more, and we'd be happy to pay for more if you provided it. This piece of content was crazy time-consuming to produce, and based on the engagement that I'm seeing, both in just the views and comments and interactions and stuff, it doesn't seem like much of anybody cares about this topic. No doubt there's a few of you that enjoy it, but my YouTube metrics wouldn't indicate that at all. So as a result of that, I'm definitely not going to do another piece of content like this in the future. It doesn't seem like this is something my audience here is very interested in, which is kind of shocking to me, because the ability to get a range, the ability to get a firing solution, things like this are absolutely fundamental and core to your ability to be a precision rifleman. Maybe I just did a bad job of putting together the video series. I don't know. Well, then, too, I don't ever do my job because I'm interested in teaching you guys. I'm not interested in being Mr. Popular. So I don't ever tell you, hey, click the like button. Go and make sure you subscribe and make sure you turn on notifications. And then, make sure you comment, too. I'm not sitting here hounding you guys at the end of every single video to get you to engage with my content, because that's what shows YouTube more than anything, more than views. That's what shows YouTube that this is being well received. And so every time one of you that likes the content that I produce here doesn't actually interface with it in any way, you don't click the like button, you don't comment, whatever. Anytime that happens, the video just nosedives and it gets thrown off a cliff by the YouTube algorithm. I've known this, obviously. I have some content out there, 1 million+ views. Like, some of my content collectively has millions and millions of views. I'm not sitting here trying to farm you guys all the time. As I alluded to this in my last video, I'm trying to provide a service. And unfortunately, social media is not set up for that. I'm perfectly fine having you guys sit here and just consume this stuff, and I don't need anything for it. I do it as a result of my obligation to God. I don't do it because I'm obligated to you guys to do it. So I'd be perfectly content to go on making stuff. But then too, if the video gets so little engagement and does very poorly, then people will never see the content that I'm creating. So it really is a double-edged sword. On one hand, I could make a bunch of clickbaity, popularity-oriented content and hammer my subscriber base way up to the moon. But then, is that meaningful either? And so, I don't know. At the end of the day, I always come back to the same conclusion when I run this around in my head long enough is, well, hey, if there's like one of you out there that's getting benefit from it, then that's got to be enough. And I'll just keep doing it. But it is disappointing when I put so much of my time into the content and it does terribly. You can't help but see those numbers. You can't help but see the low viewer counts and have it affect something. So maybe I should just get better at ignoring it. I know my life is generally more peaceful when I ignore it. And on that note, let's talk about how you maybe should be ignoring some things. Maybe you should be ignoring the world and getting away from it. I'd like to talk to you today about peace and what the absence of peace can look like, what it can bring. Many of you and many of the people that I talk to are in various states of discontent, meaning that they're frustrated or upset with the situation that they find themselves in. And oftentimes I will try to counsel people, or at least historically. These days I'm doing it less and less, because when you try to counsel someone to fix the situation that they're in that's causing all of this chaos, they will fight back against it. So if someone's very frustrated because they've got to commute an hour and a half one way into work, into the office, and then it's an hour and a half to 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, because they're going into the city same time everybody else is going into the city, and then trying to get out the same time everyone else is trying to get out. And so I would hear situations like that, and I would say, well, perhaps you get a different job. Oh, no, I need my job because I've got 2 mortgages on my house. I need the money. Okay, well, perhaps you could find some place to stay during the week that's closer to your job. You could find some type of accommodation. All you need is just sleep, you know. No, I can't do that. There's too much money and there's nothing available and all this. It doesn't matter what solution I would try to give them, they will fight back against it always, because the familiarity of the chaos has become their identity. If they didn't have that to complain about, then they would probably find some other reason to complain, because it turns out they're not sharing this with me because they want a solution. They're sharing this with me because they want empathy and they want a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. They don't want a resolution. They just want to be heard expounding about their situation. I don't think most people realize how dangerous this is. I don't think people realize the consequences that come along with having that kind of lifestyle. Because whether it's that situation or countless others that you're not happy with, that's causing you to be frustrated, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes every minute, there's something going on that you don't approve of. That can carry with it the most dire of consequences. You can frustrate yourself straight into the pits of hell, and in this life and afterwards, okay? So the consequences couldn't possibly be more severe. The world is continually manipulated by Satan. Satan has access through him, his demons, his minions, the possessed people that are under his control, whatever it may be. There is a constant and ever-present threat against all that is good from the workings of Satan. And if you don't realize that these types of frustrating situations are cultivated and engineered by Satan himself, well, then you can overlook the importance of resolving those situations in your life. Now, let me tie this together for you in full detail. If you are frustrated all the time, then you're in a state of discontent and unhappiness. It's very hard for you to be that way and also feel grateful at the same time. So you can't show proper gratitude to God while you're in the middle of being upset. It's very unlikely that those two things will be happening at the same time. So when you're upset like that, and you're definitely not worshiping God, you're not giving thanks to Him and showing Him proper grace and gratitude for all of the love and everything that He has given you. Worse still than not worshiping God correctly is worshiping Satan, because that malcontent and that frustration is a form of worship, whether you realize it or not. And giving weight to all of that in your life, the unpleasantness, giving a voice to it in that capacity, is exactly what Satan wants you to be doing. Because then it steals the time that you're supposed to be giving to God, steals your heart away from God, and allows Satan to capture it. So you staying in this very unpleasant situation has much more dire consequences than I think you realize. Letting your obligations to the world interfere with your obligations to God is one of the most common and drastic mistakes that Christians can make. And I think largely it stems from this misunderstanding of what it is that you're supposed to be doing here. You're definitely not supposed to be frustrated and upset and having things not be the way that they're supposed to be. Everything that you leave undone that you know you're supposed to do is a form of worship of Satan. Everything that you are doing that brings you a tremendous amount of frustration and anger is also a form of worship of Satan. Now, Jesus Christ is the primary example that we have as Christians to look at and say, okay, what did He do? We want to model what we're doing after what He did. And one of the things that I've always found wonderful is that He never allowed the world and the things that are going on in it to disrupt His peace to the point where He was vocal and animated and angry about it in that way. Sure, He flipped the tables of the money changers for setting up shop in His Father's temple, and he was constantly dressing people down, but it was always in the service of God. It was always in service of what is right and trying to make sure that people had the teaching laid out for them so that they can make right choices. He wasn't just a temper tantrum for the sake of it. He had purpose behind everything that He did. And one of the things that He did that had tremendous purpose was to get away from people. I'll read to you now from Matthew chapter 14, verse 13. And this is just after Jesus learned of the death of John the Baptist, okay? So He had just received some unpleasant news. And it says, when Jesus heard it, He departed from there by boat to a deserted place by Himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed Him on foot from the cities. So essentially, Jesus wanted to be by Himself. He left by boat all of the people that He was with behind. So because of the situation that He found Himself, He wanted to be by Himself. He wanted to get away from the world and the people in it. Well, why would He want to do that? He is our Savior. He is Jesus Christ. Why would He want to get away from us? Well, even Jesus couldn't deal with the people at sometimes. The horror, the tragedy, the pain, the loss, whatever it may be, the point is, Jesus made the decision to leave. That's what He did. Now, ultimately, the multitudes found Him. Okay? They went to where He was. He preached some more. He taught them some more. And then later in verse 23, it says, and when He had sent the multitudes away, He went up on a mountain by Himself to pray. Now when evening came, He was alone there. So the multitudes follow Him, and then He says to go away. When he takes care of them, he sees they're in need, he takes care of them, and then he sends them away, and finally does find himself alone, and he is able to pray. He's able to be by himself. Now, obviously, most of you are familiar with the story when Jesus first started his ministry. He found John the Baptist in the river, was baptized, and was sent out into the wilderness, went out in the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. He was by himself for those 40 days, okay? So the solitude, being alone, maybe it's there that he found his purpose. Maybe he was able to align his flesh with the purpose that God had sent him to fulfill, perhaps. Now, obviously, the Gospels, so you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and these are all apostles of Jesus Christ. They're disciples of Jesus Christ. These are their firsthand accounts of their time with Jesus. And so it's oftentimes it's these separate people that are all at the same time in place with Jesus while these events were taking place, and this is their account of it. Now we have another example here in Mark chapter 1, verse 35. And it says, "Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed." So here again we see he got up way before daylight. Okay, it says before sunrise. And so he got up really early and left everybody to go be by himself. Maybe he got up really early because everybody else was lounging around in the mornings, and he knew that if he got up early enough, he could skate out of there with nobody else following him. But he went off to be by himself again. And later in Mark chapter 3, and this is verse 13, and this is just before Jesus actually chooses his apostles, right? He picks the 12, essentially. And it says here, he went up on the mountain and called to him those he himself wanted, and they came to him. And so here's a situation where he went to be by himself first, and then he selected those that he wanted, that him, obviously aligned with God, were chosen, those chosen people to come and be around him. And there's quite a few different examples of Jesus going off to be by himself. And a lot of people these days, I think, don't give proper weight to that. The authority that Jesus had on this earth is unlike anyone that has ever been on this earth. And so he could have done many things in that situation, but he chose to go and be by himself. And that's something that I want to make sure that you all understand. The obligation that you have to the world does not supersede the obligation that you have to God. The Holy Spirit dwells within you as a follower of Jesus Christ. You receive the Holy Spirit by going and making a commitment to God and to Jesus, to the Word. And Jesus taught us how to worship correctly. The Bible, God's Word, teaches us how to maintain that correctly. Now, when we have the Holy Spirit dwelling within us in that capacity, we are choosing whether to be guided by it or not. And this is the part where those of you that are having a bunch of chaos in your life all the time, things going on that you don't want going on, being frustrated and angry all the time, you're actually serving yourself up to Satan and his minions by being in that state, and you're cutting yourself off from God because the Spirit talks to us. God's voice speaks to us in what is referred to as the still, small voice. So it's like a whisper. It's maybe even less than a whisper, but if the chaos of the world is dominating our life, what chance would we have to hear it? What possible moment of peace would we have to listen to the direction that we're getting from the Spirit, to move in those ways that God finds to be most pleasing? So letting these situations persist in your life is probably not something that is manly and tough and right that you do. You have to be willing to go to the quiet place, and if necessary, for a long time, whatever it takes for you to maintain and cultivate that communication with the still small voice, the spirit that dwells within you, the conduit to God that you should be going to for guidance. Letting these chaotic situations persist in your lives is a sure way to find yourself cut off from His direction. And so don't feel like the obligation that you have to the world, your job, your bills, and all this stuff is supposed to supersede the plan that God has for you, the peace that God can bring for you if you would but choose it. Now, I'm not saying to be delinquent of your obligations. Obviously, if you've made financial obligations, you need to see them through. But if you need to take 5 minutes to go and sit in a dark, quiet room somewhere to make sure that you've got the strength from God to see the rest of that through for the rest of the day, you better be taking that time. If you are not taking the 5 minutes before you put your car in drive to make that commute every day, to say some prayers, to talk to God, to get some direction from that Spirit, to have Him still and calm your heart before you take that drive, who knows what kind of terrible situation you could find yourself in? Who knows how you'll react to the situations that the world and Satan's minions will engineer for you that day if you didn't take time to properly consult God before you started your day. Peace is something that you have to choose, just like you have to choose to obey God. And if you read the scripture as He's commanded that we do, you'll find all kinds of very clever mechanisms, very good instructions that He's given us to make sure that we are going to Him frequently enough and rightly every single day to empower us to make sure that we're not making these mistakes, to make sure that our heart stays connected to Him and not the world. That is what allows us to operate in the world with His blessing. It's not the other way around. We choose to go to Him, and then He blesses us. It's not He chooses us, and then we bless Him with our obedience. It's not that way. And I think some of you might have this whole thing a little bit backwards. So if you'd like the quality of your life to improve, maybe you should just start obeying a little bit first. Maybe you should listen and try to really find that still small voice within you and figure out what it is that He is saying. Could be that you're actually spending too much time as a servant of chaos and not nearly enough time as a servant of God. I would pray for all of you that you would take the time to open the Bible, read a little bit of scripture. That should be done daily, and it should be done first. And then it should be done as often as you need or would like, or as often as you think He would like for you to do it throughout the rest of that day. And do that every day. Then, just maybe, and I say maybe, but with a smile on my face because I know that it's not a maybe, then you might just have some of the peace that being firmly connected with Jesus, firmly connected with God and His Word, you might have some of that peace and contentment and gratitude start to fill your life. You might find that making the decisions that you need to make to separate yourself from the world and the situations that are causing the unrest, it might make that all a lot easier. The impossibility of that situation might not seem as impossible anymore. The solution to that situation might present itself, but in order for that to happen, you're going to have to choose Him first. You're going to have to set down your addiction to the chaos, and you're going to have to pick up the righteous fear of God, the righteous willingness to do His work then it's very likely the options will start flooding in and you will no longer feel trapped, because no true follower of Jesus Christ feels trapped. They feel led and they're confident in the direction that they're being taken. That, my friends, is the road to lasting peace. It's the road to peace that the world did not grant, nor can the world take away. It's the kind of peace that only the creator of the universe can offer you. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a blessed and wonderful week.